In the language of Korean drama, few sins cut deeper than a public denial. But when a mafia boss commits it to shield the woman he loves, and she hears every devastating word, it triggers a pursuit of pure desperation. This is the story of a powerful man brought to his knees on a rain-soaked street, begging for a forgiveness he knows he may never deserve. We're about to dissect the ultimate romantic gambit, the noble lie that destroys everything it was meant to save. Why would a man with absolute power choose public humiliation as his only shield? And what happens when the woman he's sacrificing for decides she's done being a pawn in his dangerous game? To understand the cataclysm of that rainy night, you have to go back to the beginning, to the moment their two fractured worlds first collided. On one side, Aris Walker, a rising star in the Seoul art scene. Her future was a canvas of brilliant color, until a single night, a hit-and-run driver and a shattered wrist left her world in monochrome. The damage was neurological. The fine motor control required for her intricate brushwork was simply gone. At 26, her career was over. Medical bills devoured her savings, and the galleries that once championed her work quietly turned their attention to the next prodigy. Desperation, cold and practical, led her to answer a listing that was equal parts intriguing and alarming. The interview was held in the back room of a quiet tea house in Gangnam. The man across from her, who gave his name only as Mr. Kim, asked no questions about her art. Instead, he focused on her present circumstances. You have no immediate family in the country, correct? You are comfortable with discretion, with not asking questions about what you might see or hear. Aris, with nothing left to lose, nodded. The salary he quoted was astronomical. The only requirement, complete, unquestioning service to a single employer in a live-in position. She signed the contract that night. A week later, a black sedan delivered her to the base of the Hangang River View Tower, one of the most exclusive residential addresses in the city. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, a vast space of polished concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass, and staggering silence. This is where she first met him. June. He stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the sprawling Seoul skyline. When he turned, his presence wasn't loud, it was absolute. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his face was all sharp angles and controlled stillness. He looked younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, but his eyes held a weight that felt ancient. "I am June," he said, his voice low and measured. "This is your workplace. Your quarters are through that door. You will find them adequate." He laid out one non-negotiable rule. The study at the end of the east hallway was forbidden. She was not to enter, not to approach, not to acknowledge its existence. "Break this rule," he said, his gaze unwavering, "and you will be removed, not with drama but with finality, as if you were never here." Aris understood the language of survival. She nodded. Understood. And so her new life began. June was a creature of immutable routine, and Aris learned his rhythms with the focus she once applied to mastering a new technique. His morning espresso, prepared at exactly 6:45, the way he preferred his newspapers ironed, the specific, silent order of his wardrobe. She performed her duties with a quiet efficiency that seemed to satisfy him. Their interactions were transactional, devoid of warmth but not of a strange, mutual respect. But the penthouse was not silent. Late at night, she would hear the murmur of voices from behind the study's closed door. She glimpsed visitors, men with hardened faces and expensive watches who moved with the wary grace of predators. Once, while cleaning the guest bathroom after one such meeting, she found a small, sleek handgun left beside the sink. She cleaned around it. When she returned an hour later, it was gone. She asked no questions. June, for his part, seemed to observe her with a detached curiosity. He never mentioned her past, but she knew he was aware of it. "Her research on everyone in my home is thorough," he'd said simply one day. Then, a month into her employment, a small, wrapped package appeared on her dressing table. Inside was a jade pendant on a delicate silver chain. The note, in his precise handwriting, read only, "For protection." In Korean tradition, jade wards off harm. It was the first personal gesture, and it confused her more than any threat. The first real crack in their professional facade came because of her hand. The old injury ached in the soul cold, and she'd been struggling to open a stubborn jar in the kitchen. He entered, wordlessly took it from her, opened it with ease, and set it down. His eyes flicked to her wrist, which she was subconsciously rubbing. "The nerve damage," he stated. "It pains you still." Before she could reply, he was gone. The next afternoon, a Dr. Lee, a specialist in neuromuscular rehabilitation, arrived at the penthouse. June had arranged and fully paid for a consultation. "Your employer insists," the doctor said with a kind smile. He was quite specific about finding the best. Eris underwent the assessment in a state of shock. Afterward, she found June in the living room. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. He didn't look up from his tablet. "An asset in pain is an inefficient asset. This is a practical investment." But the calculation in his eyes felt like a lie. It was the first time she sensed the man beneath the fortress walls. As weeks turned to months, a fragile, unspoken dialogue evolved. She would leave a pot of ginger tea on his desk after overhearing a particularly tense phone call. He would have her favorite art supplies, ones she could never afford now, delivered to her room without comment. She began reading the business section he discarded, noticing his circled interests in legitimate ventures, shipping logistics, boutique hotels. He was building something new, or trying to. But the shadow world wouldn't relent. The late-night meetings grew more frequent, the voices more strained. One evening, she answered the penthouse door to two of June's men supporting a third whose suit jacket was darkly stained. They hurried past her without a word. That night, June emerged from his study looking exhausted. For the first time, he spoke to her without the filter of command. "There are competing interests," he said, staring out at the city lights. "Men who believe my territory should be theirs. They do not understand the new rules." Eris stood beside him, following his gaze. "And what are the new rules?" He was silent for a long moment. "Fewer graves, more boardrooms." He finally looked at her. "It is a difficult transition." The threat became tangible 2 days later. The penthouse's sophisticated security system detected a breach attempt on the service entrance. No one got in, but the message was clear. His sanctuary was known, and it was vulnerable. June's demeanor changed instantly. The thoughtful man receded. The tactical commander took full control. Additional security personnel appeared in the building lobby. Her movements were subtly restricted. Jean, his most trusted driver, was now her permanent shadow. June called her into his study, the forbidden room. It was not a den of villainy, but a clean, modern office with multiple monitors displaying security feeds and financial charts. "The man leading the opposition is named Kang," June explained, his voice cold. "He is old world. He believes in demonstrations of power, in making examples." He turned a monitor toward her. It showed a grainy image of her leaving a local market 2 days prior. "He has identified you as a point of pressure." Eris felt the blood drain from her face. "What does he want?" "Everything I've built, and he will use any leverage to get it." June's jaw tightened. "You will not leave the penthouse without Jean. You will vary your routines. You will be a ghost." "And my work?" she asked, thinking of the small teaching gig she'd secretly taken at a community center, using adapted techniques to guide others with physical limitations. "Especially that," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It is a pattern of vulnerability. It ends now." The order felt like a sentence. That teaching gig was the first thing that had felt like hers since the accident. It was a tiny piece of Eris Walker, the artist, rebuilt from ash. To surrender, it felt like losing herself all over again. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the strategist knowing he was right, the man perhaps having the necessity. But he did not relent. The tension in the penthouse became a living thing. June was constantly on calls, negotiating, maneuvering. Eris moved through the rooms like a silent ghost, following the new, stricter protocols. The connection they'd been building, the shared looks, the unspoken understandings, froze under the pressure of external threat. He was retreating into the fortress, and she was left outside the walls. The breaking point arrived on a rain-lashed Thursday. June had called an emergency meeting with his most senior lieutenants. The air in the penthouse vibrated with tension. From her quarters, Aris could hear the raised voices, the occasional sharp command from June cutting through the Korean. She needed to deliver refreshments, a part of her normal duties. As she approached the study door, tray in hand, she heard Kang's name mentioned. Then June's voice, clear and cold in English, perhaps for the benefit of a non-Korean speaker on a conference call. He is grasping at straws. He thinks because the woman Aris lives here, she is a weakness, a leverage point. There was a pause, a question from someone else inaudible. Then June's reply delivered with dismissive, icy finality. Aris, she is nothing, an employee, a convenience. If Kang thinks he can use her to get to me, he is even more of a fool than I thought. She is functionally invisible. The words didn't just hit her, they dissolved the ground beneath her feet. Nothing. A convenience. Functionally invisible. The tray in her hands became impossibly heavy. She set it down silently on a side table, her movements automatic. The voices behind the door continued, discussing strategy, unaware of the annihilation that had just occurred on the other side of the wood. Aris turned and walked back to her room. The hurt was so profound it was silent. It wasn't just the cruelty of the words, it was the expertly crafted delivery, meant to be overheard by the wrong ears to create a specific, false narrative. The noble lie in its most brutal form. He was erasing her publicly to protect her. But in that moment, protection felt indistinguishable from annihilation. She didn't pack a bag. She took only her purse, the jade pendant around her neck, and the single suitcase she'd arrived with. She left the penthouse via the service elevator, her phone switched off. The tracking app June had insisted she install disabled. She vanished into the Seoul rain, a ghost exactly as he described her. He discovered her absence an hour later when the meeting concluded. The untouched tray, the empty room, the silenced phone. The security feed showed her leaving, her face a mask of composed devastation. In that moment, June, the meticulous strategist, the controlled commander, shattered. Every calculated reason for his denial collided with the catastrophic reality of its effect. He didn't order his men to find her. He went himself. The city, vast and teeming, became a maze he had to conquer. He called in every favor, pressured every informant, tore through the layers of Seoul's underworld not as a boss issuing commands, but as a man possessed. The rain soaked through his tailored suit as he moved from her old haunts to the community center she'd never named, to the friends she'd drifted from after her accident. The powerful, immutable June was unraveling, driven by a desperation his world had no language for. He found her, finally, not through power or intimidation, but through a moment of shared memory. He remembered her once mentioning a small, hidden viewpoint in Namsan Park, a place she went to sketch the city when it felt overwhelming. And there she was, standing under the shelter of a pagoda, looking out at the glittering, rain-blurred city, the pendant he gave her gleaming at her throat. He didn't call out. He simply walked into the clearing, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his suit a ruined second skin. He stopped a few feet from her, and then, in an act that would have been unthinkable 12 hours before, he lowered himself to one knee on the wet pavement. The ultimate power inversion. The boss on his knees. Not a strategic move, but a surrender. Aris, he said, his voice raw, stripped of all its controlled authority. Every word I said was a lie. You are not nothing. You are the only thing that has been real in that empty tower for months. I denied you to protect you from a war I created. And in doing so, I became the thing you needed protection from. I will spend every day of my life begging your forgiveness if you will just let me. He looked up at her, his expression cracked wide open, offering not power but vulnerability. Not a command, but a plea. The scene was a perfect, painful echo of 1,000 K-drama climaxes, but for them in that moment, it was terrifyingly, uniquely real. The question hung in the saturated air between them, heavier than the rain. Could a lie born of protection ever become the foundation for truth? But before we witness her answer, we need to rewind. To understand how a man like June builds an empire designed to have no weak points, and how a woman like Aris becomes the vulnerability he never saw coming. The story of the denial is only the middle. The beginning is a tale of two ruins, and how they accidentally built a sanctuary in each other before the world tried to burn it down. In the suspended silence after his confession, Aris didn't see a powerful boss brought low. She saw the master strategist even in his desperation. And the most dangerous question formed in her mind: was this vulnerability just another move on his board? Her voice, when it came, was as steady as the rain. "You told them I was nothing, a convenience, invisible, for my protection. Explain to me how those words protect me from anything but you." June didn't rise from his knee. The posture of submission remained, but his eyes held hers with a terrifying directness. Kang's people were in the building, not just electronic ears. A man on the cleaning staff paid to listen. The denial was for him, to make you disappear as a target in their eyes, to reduce your value to zero in their calculation. He took a sharp breath. "It was the fastest, cleanest algorithm to ensure your safety. I did not calculate for you hearing it." That was the critical failure. "An algorithm," Aris repeated, the word chilling in its detachment. "So this," she gestured to him kneeling, "is this the next phase of the calculation, the corrective action?" For the first time, something like true anguish broke through his controlled explanation. "No, this is the system crash." He finally stood, but the movement was weary, defeated. The algorithm was supposed to create distance, a firewall. Instead, it initiated total deletion of the one thing the system was designed to preserve. "I am not following a protocol now. I am begging the universe for a restore point that doesn't exist." The raw, unscripted pain in his voice was the first thing that felt real to her since she'd heard the denial. It cracked the ice around her own hurt. She looked away at the city lights smeared by rain. "You took my work from me, the teaching. You called it a vulnerability and you terminated it. That was the last piece of me I had left, June. Not Aris the employee, Aris the person." He was silent for a long moment. "I know, and that was the second catastrophic error, not strategic, personal." He reached into his soaked jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper protected in a plastic sleeve. He held it out. "The community center. I visited it yesterday after I realized you were gone. I spoke with the director, a Mrs. Cho." "Aris didn't take it. Why?" "To understand what I had ordered you to destroy." He unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing, brightly colored crayon. A stick figure with a big smile stood before an easel. "A student of yours, Mina. She told Mrs. Cho to give this to the art teacher who showed her how to draw with her left hand. Her right side is partially paralyzed. You taught her cross-body adaptation techniques." Aris felt tears mix with the rain on her cheeks. She took the drawing. "How did you? I never told you about her." "Because you protect what matters to you," June said softly. "You hide it. I had to become a detective to discover the life you were building right under my nose, a life so meaningful you would rather vanish than let me dismantle it further. My security assessment was correct about the pattern creating risk. It was wrong about everything that mattered." This was the pivot, not just an apology but a dismantling of his own logic. He wasn't justifying his actions, he was forensicizing his failures. And in doing so, he was showing her a map of his own values, or where they had become corrupted by the world he lived in. "What happens now?" she asked, her defiance giving way to exhaustion. "Kang still exists. Your war isn't over. Am I just supposed to come back to the tower and wait for the next algorithm to sacrifice another piece of me?" June shook his head, a new determination settling over his features. "No, the war is over. I ended it tonight before I came looking for you." He said it so matter-of-factly that it took a second for the meaning to land. "You ended it how?" "By surrendering." The word was so alien coming from him that Aris could only stare. The June she knew did not surrender. He negotiated, he dominated, he strategized. He did not capitulate. "I ceded the disputed distribution channels to Kang, the territories he wanted. I gifted them, with clean paperwork and public witnesses from rival factions. It is no longer a contested prize. It is his, legally and publicly. To attack me now would be seen as petty, ungrateful, and invite unified response from others who benefited from the orderly transfer. He spoke like he was reading a financial report. I have transformed a conflict into a settled business transaction. There is no more leverage for him to seek, no more war to shield you from. The magnitude of the concession was staggering. He had given up the very thing the conflict was about, the source of the danger, to remove the threat matrix entirely. Not to win, but to remove the game board. You gave it all away, because of what happened with me. Because the cost of holding it became infinite, he corrected, his gaze intense. The equation changed. The variable representing your safety could not be balanced, so I eliminated the conflicting variable instead. He took a step closer, the rain streaming down his face. The business can be rebuilt in other forms on other terms. What I was trying to protect cannot. This was the revelation that reframed everything. The denial in the penthouse wasn't the climax of his protective strategy. It was its catastrophic failure. And his response wasn't to double down on control, but to systematically dismantle the very source of the danger. He wasn't just apologizing. He was architecting a new reality with different rules. But the mind, especially a wounded one, rebels against such a clean narrative. And what about my work, my life? You can't just hand back a territory and expect everything to go back to how it was. I don't, he said quickly. I have a proposal, not as your employer, as someone who has critically failed a partner. He used the word deliberately. The community center. I spoke with Mrs. Cho about their need for a dedicated adaptive art studio, proper equipment, funded scholarships, a permanent staff position for a program director. The endowment is already established. The position has no connection to me. It is yours if you want it, a sanctuary you control. He was offering her a lifeboat, built to her exact specifications, and casting it away from his ship. It was the antithesis of control. It was restoration with autonomy. The generosity of it was disorienting. Why would you do that? She whispered. Because I watched you rebuild yourself from ruins once, he said, his voice dropping. And instead of helping, I became another force of destruction. This is not an apology. It is reparations. The first of many, if you allow it. Eris looked at the child's drawing in her hand, the paper now damp at the edges. She looked at the man standing before her, power and prestige sacrificed, offering not excuses but concrete, painful change. The anger was still there, a cold stone in her chest, but beneath it something else stirred, the terrifying possibility of trust. Take me somewhere dry, she said finally, not forgiving, not accepting, but opening a door. We have more to discuss than the weather. He didn't smile, but the relief in his eyes was profound. He simply nodded and led her to where his car was discreetly parked. But as they drove away from the park, neither noticed the dark sedan that pulled out from a shadowed side street 2 blocks behind them, its headlights off, following at a careful distance. The conversation didn't happen in the penthouse. June directed his driver to a small, secure, safe house, a modest apartment in a nondescript building in Mapogu. It was sparse, clean, and utterly devoid of the tower's intimidating luxury. Here, over tea that June prepared himself, clumsier than she'd ever seen him, the real excavation began. He told her about his uncle, the ruthless old-world boss who saw a sharp, orphan nephew as a useful tool. He told her about his first favor, collecting a debt from a weeping shopkeeper at 16, about the slow, moral calcification that came with survival in that world. And then, about the creeping dissatisfaction, the desire to build something that wouldn't crumble into violence, symbolized by his careful investments in legitimate businesses. You were the first person in that tower who wasn't afraid of me or trying to use me, he said, staring into his teacup. You were just, competently, quietly yourself, even in your grief, especially in your grief. It was a mirror I hadn't known I needed. Watching you rebuild your art into teaching, it was a masterclass in adaptation. It made my own plans to transition my business seem cowardly and slow. Eris listened, her own story unfolding in tandem. She spoke of the isolation after the accident, the pity that felt like poison, the way the teaching gig had started as a desperate grasp for purpose and become a lifeline. "They don't see what they've lost when they come to me," she said. "They see what's still possible. You were the only one who ever made me feel like my loss was all anyone could see." The mutual unmasking was brutal and necessary. Hours passed. The rain stopped. Dawn began to bleed into the sky. And then a single buzz from June's encrypted phone. He read the message and his entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face. He looked up at Aris, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen before: pure, unadulterated fear. "He didn't accept the surrender," June said, his voice hollow. "What?" "Kang, the transfer. He refused it, publicly, at the signing meeting an hour ago." June stood, packing the small room like a caged animal. "He said gifts from dogs are always poisoned. He said true power isn't taken through paperwork but taken through blood. By making the offer, I showed him my throat, and he has decided to bite." The stakes had just escalated beyond territory, beyond business. Kang had interpreted June's strategic withdrawal as the ultimate weakness. The old world rules demanded that when a rival shows vulnerability, you exterminate them. June's attempt to end the conflict peacefully had ignited it into a personal, bloody feud. "He has a new target," June said, stopping to look at her, the terror now mixed with a furious, protective rage. "Not the business, not the territory. He wants to take what he believes I value most, to break me completely. He's declared war not on my empire but on my soul." Aris understood before he said it. The safe house, the careful secrecy, it was already too late. Kang wasn't interested in the territories anymore. He wanted the variable June had just proven was priceless. He wanted her. The buzzer for the apartment's main door downstairs rang, sharp and shocking in the tense silence. They both froze. No one knew this location except June and his most trusted driver. June moved to the monitor. The camera feed showed the lobby. It was empty. Then a piece of paper was slid under the outer door. A single sheet. June's men, stationed outside, had seen nothing. He didn't need to retrieve it. He accessed the lobby camera's playback, zooming in on the paper. It was a printed photograph of Aris, taken yesterday, leaving the community center. Across the bottom, in bold Korean characters, were two words: "Found you." The message was clear. This wasn't a threat against June's property. It was a hunt, and the prey had been sighted. All of June's calculations, his surrenders, his reparations, they had just been rendered obsolete by a man who played by crueler, simpler rules. June turned to Aris, all softness gone, replaced by the cold, lethal focus of a wartime general. "We're leaving, now, a different protocol." He grabbed a go bag from a hidden compartment. "Kang has made this personal, which means he has made it winnable, because now I have nothing left to lose but you." But as he reached for her hand, Aris pulled back. The fear was there, icy in her veins, but so was a dawning, furious clarity. "No more protocols, June. No more algorithms. He's not hunting your employee. He's hunting the woman you love, so we stop running. We use that." June stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you spent all night telling me you see me. Now you have to see what I can do. I'm not just a variable to be protected. I can be part of the equation." Her eyes were fierce, the artist who had learned to adapt, to use limitation as strength. "You tried to play his game and lost. So we change the game. We use what he thinks is your weakness as the weapon." In that moment, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. The protector and the protected vanished. In their place stood two allies, backed into a corner with a common enemy who had just made a fatal mistake. He had threatened them both. But before they could plan, before they could fight, they had to survive the next 5 minutes. Because outside, the dark sedan that had followed them from Namsen was now parked across the street, and its doors were opening. But the two men stepping from the sedan weren't Kang's enforcers. They were June's own. and they were there to deliver a message that would shatter every assumption about the war they thought they were fighting. June watched the monitor, his body coiled for attack, then went still with confusion. That's Min Ho and Seung Rai, his two most trusted captains. They didn't approach the building. Instead, Min Ho simply held up a single finger, then pointed it toward the east before both men got back in the car and drove away. It's a redirect, June said, his mind processing at lightning speed. An emergency signal. They're telling me to go to the secondary extraction point and that they're being watched. He moved to the window, peering through a slit in the blinds. There will be another team, Kang's, nearby. My men just led them away. He turned to Aris, his decision made. We have a 5-minute window. There's a service tunnel in the basement of this building built during the war. It connects to the subway maintenance system. We use it. They moved. June grabbed the go bag and Aris followed him out of the apartment and down a set of back stairs to a neglected basement. Behind a rusted boiler, he pried open a disguised hatch. The tunnel beyond was narrow, damp, and pitch black. He produced a small flashlight. Stay close. They emerged 20 minutes later into a deserted subway service platform. A single, unmarked car waited, its engine idling. The driver was an elderly man who nodded at June but said nothing. As they sped through the dark tunnels, June's phone buzzed again. A secure file transfer. He opened it and his face hardened. It's not just Kang, he said, showing Aris the screen. It was a financial ledger but with familiar names. My uncle, he's been funneling capital to Kang for months. He's backing the challenge. The betrayal was absolute. The man who had raised him, who had taught him the rules of this world, was financing his destruction. The old guard, it seemed, had no intention of letting June transition to legitimacy. It was a coup. But why? Aris asked, trying to grasp the enormity. Because I am becoming what he fears, June replied, his voice cold. A man who doesn't need violence to be powerful. To the old world, that is heresy, and heretics must be burned. The safe house, the surrender, the hunt for Aris, it was all theater. The real war was a generational one, a battle for the soul of the organization itself. And June's uncle had chosen Kang as his champion. The car surfaced in a warehouse district near the port. They were ushered into a sparse office where Min Ho and Seung Rai waited, their faces grim. We have a location, Min Ho said without preamble. Your uncle is hosting a council tonight at the old dockside warehouse. He's presenting Kang as the new leadership. He's calling in all the old debts, all the loyalties. June absorbed this. The entire structure he'd built was being dismantled in a single night. How many are with him? Enough, Seung Rai said quietly. The promise of a return to the old ways, to simpler profits. It's appealing to many. And the ones who aren't? June asked. Neutral, waiting to see who survives the night. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The conflict had metastasized. It was no longer June versus Kang. It was June versus his own past, his own mentor, and the very identity of the organization. The stakes were no longer territory or even Aris's safety. They were about which version of the future would be allowed to exist. Aris, who had been listening silently, spoke up. This council, it's a performance. He's presenting a narrative that you're weak, that you've lost your way, that you're distracted by, she gestured to herself, by a liability. To win, you don't need a bigger army. You need a better story. All eyes turned to her. June's captains looked skeptical, but June's gaze was intensely focused. Explain. You said it yourself. He's afraid of what you're becoming, a legitimate businessman. That's your strength, not your weakness. So you don't go to his council as a challenger for the old throne. You go as the new thing he's terrified of. You don't ask for their loyalty. You show them the exit strategy from a dying world. She was using the principles of adaptation, of turning limitation into strength. June was fighting on his uncle's terms, in his uncle's arena. Aris was suggesting they change the arena itself. Min Ho frowned. With respect, miss, this is not an art project. This is about power. It is about power, Eris fired back. The power of a better offer. You said the neutral ones are waiting to see who survives. So you show them who gives them a future, not just a bigger slice of a rotting pie. June was silent for a long moment, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the smile of a boss, but of an innovator. She's right. My uncle is selling nostalgia for a bloodier past. We will sell a cleaner future, with charts. He began to pace, the strategist fully engaged. We have the legitimate holdings, the shipping logistics company, the hotel group, the venture capital fund. We have the books to prove they're more profitable with less risk than the old operations. We turn the council into a shareholder meeting. But they'll never let you walk in there, Seung-Rai protested. Not as a fighter, June agreed, but as a CEO with a board presentation. He looked at Eris, the idea crystallizing. We need a spectacle, not a force, but of transformation. The plan was audacious, fragile, and brilliant. They would crash the council, but not with guns, with a proposition. June would publicly, irrevocably, sever ties with the old business, offering his former associates a structured, profitable way to follow him into legitimacy, or be left behind in a war with Kang and his uncle. It was a gamble that hinged entirely on one thing: the desire of men who lived by violence to finally lay down their arms. But as they began to outline the details, Seung-Rai's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his face turned ashen. He looked at June, then at Eris with pure dread. The community center, Mrs. Cho, there was a fire. The world dropped out from under Eris. Is she? She's alive, in the hospital, smoke inhalation. Seung-Rai's voice was thick. But the center, it's gone. The adaptive art studio, the equipment, all of it. Kang's message was clear. He wasn't just targeting Eris's present. He was erasing her future, burning down the sanctuary June had just promised to build for her. It was psychological warfare of the cruelest kind. The attack wasn't on a rival's asset, but on a dream. It was designed not just to hurt Eris, but to prove to June that anything he tried to build, anything good he tried to touch, would be reduced to ash. The room went silent. The bold plan, the clever narrative, seemed to evaporate in the face of such nihilistic brutality. Eris felt the loss like a physical blow, the drawings of her students, the adapted brushes, the hope, all gone. She looked at June and saw the same realization in his eyes. Kang and his uncle didn't want a negotiation. They wanted annihilation. June's expression shifted from strategist to something darker, more primal. The cool calculus was gone, replaced by a cold, infinite rage. That, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, was his final move. He turned to his captains. Forget the presentation. Cancel all directives about non-violence. Mobilize every asset we have left. I don't care if they're loyal or mercenary. I want a perimeter around that hospital. I want a team on my uncle's estate. I want Kang's face on every screen in the city with a price attached that will make his own mother turn him in. This was the escalation into all-out war, the point of no return. June was shedding the skin of the future businessman and reaching for the old tools of vengeance. The transformation Eris had sparked was being buried under the rubble of the community center. But as June began barking orders, Eris reached out and grabbed his arm. Her tears were gone, replaced by a terrifying calm. No. He stared at her, incredulous. Eris, he burned. I know what he burned. He burned a building. He burned paper and wood and plastic. He did not burn Mina's ability to draw with her left hand. He did not burn what you taught me about adaptation. Her grip tightened. If you do this, if you become him to fight him, then he wins. He proves your uncle right, that the old ways are the only ways. And everything we've just fought for, everything you knelt in the rain to apologize for, it all means nothing. She stepped into his space, her voice low and fierce. You want to protect me? Then protect the idea you said you believed in. The better way, the clean way, the way that doesn't end with more graves. You go to that council and you give your presentation, and you show them that when they burn our future, we build a better one right in front of them. The standoff between Rage and Principal hung in the air. June was a sword drawn, ready to strike. Aris was the hand on the scabbard. The two paths forward were laid bare, vengeance or vision. June closed his eyes, wrestling with the titanic force of his own anger. When he opened them, he looked at Seung-Rai. The mobilization order stands, but they are to hold, defensive positions only. Protect the hospital, protect our remaining legitimate holdings. No offensive actions. He turned back to Aris, the storm in his eyes slowly settling into a steely resolve. We do it your way. We build in the ruins, starting tonight. He looked at his watch. The council convenes at midnight. We have 3 hours to turn a Profitan law statement into a weapon. He allowed himself the faintest ghost of a smile. It seems the art of war and the art of adaptation have more in common than I thought. As they began to work, gathering data, preparing slides, forging a new narrative from the ashes, the stakes had never been higher. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the soul of a man and for the future of a dream that had just been set on fire. The stage was set for a confrontation that would defy every rule of the world June was born into. But to win, they would have to do the one thing his enemies would never expect. They would have to walk into the lion's den, unarmed, and offer the lions a key to a bigger, safer cage. The warehouse on the old docks was a temple to a dying god, the god of brute force, whispered threats, and blood-soaked loyalty. And into that temple, at 5 minutes past midnight, walked a heresy in the form of a man in a tailored suit and a woman holding a tablet computer. Silence fell like a hammer. 30 men, the entrenched council of the old organization, stared as June and Aris walked across the concrete floor, their footsteps echoing. Flanking them were only Min-ho and Seung-Rai, who carried not weapons but sleek leather briefcases. At the head of a scarred wooden table sat June's uncle, an old tiger with cold eyes. To his right, Kang, looking like a man who had already won. "You have no standing here, nephew," the uncle said, his voice gravelly with decades of smoke and spite. "You surrendered your seat when you offered your birthright to this dog." He didn't even glance at Kang. "I'm not here to claim a seat, uncle," June replied, his voice carrying easily in the cavernous space. "I'm here to make a final shareholder presentation." A ripple of confused murmurs went through the room. Kang laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Shareholder, you come here after your whore's little art school burned down to talk about stocks." June didn't flinch. He didn't even look at Kang. He kept his eyes on his uncle, on the men around the table whose loyalty was bought with fear and fatting money. "I am here to present the annual report and future projections for Han River Holdings, Sovereign Logistics, and Blue Gate Ventures. Legitimate enterprises, profitable enterprises, businesses that do not require you to look over your shoulder or to make examples of teachers and children." He nodded to Seung-Rai, who opened a briefcase and began distributing bound financial folders. Men accustomed to envelopes of cash stared at charts, profit margins, and growth projections. Aris connected the tablet to a portable projector she'd pulled from the other briefcase. On a dirty warehouse wall, she projected a clean, professional slide. "This," June said, pointing to a graph, "is the 5-year revenue trend of our illegal operations, adjusted for risk, legal cost, and asset loss." The line was volatile, trending downward. "And this," he clicked to the next slide, "is the 3-year trend of our legitimate holdings, steady, climbing, and entirely untouchable by the police currently surrounding this building." That got a reaction. Chairs scraped. Men looked toward the sealed doors. June's uncle's eyes narrowed. "Bluff. Inspector Park of the Financial Investigation Unit is a friend of our new hotel group's golf tournament," June said calmly. "He is aware of this meeting. He is waiting for my text to either raid a gathering of known associates of Kang Seok-Jung, wanted for arson and attempted murder, or to go home and let businessmen discuss mergers." He had reframed the entire situation. He wasn't a supplicant or a challenger. He was a man offering a choice between two futures, one ending in a police van, the other in a boardroom. Kang slammed his fist on the table. Enough! You think these old fools want to play golf with politicians? They want respect, power you can hold. Power that is shrinking every day, Aris spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, cutting through the male anger. She advanced and changed the slide. It showed the charred remains of the community center. This is your power, Mr. Kang, destruction. It is simple, it is easy, and it is finite. You can burn down every beautiful, fragile thing in this city, and all you will be left with is ash and more enemies. She changed the slide again. This one showed architectural plans. A new, larger community center with a dedicated adaptive arts wing, a physical therapy studio, and a digital lab. The rendering was beautiful, full of light. This is what can be built instead, not with threats but with capital, not with fear but with purpose. Which legacy would you rather own? She was speaking directly to the room, to the men who had grandchildren, who had regrets, who maybe dreamed of a name that wasn't a curse. The air had changed. The conflict was no longer about who was the strongest predator. It was about what kind of men they wanted to be. June's uncle stood, his face purple with rage. You bring this artist into our sanctum to shame us with children's drawings. You are weak. Your father would have died of shame. My father, June said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, died in a fishing accident because he was too poor to fix his boat. You offered me a way out of that poverty. I took it. And now I am offering you and every man here a way out of the poverty of being forever a monster in the shadows. That is not weakness. That is evolution. He looked around the room, making eye contact with key figures, the treasurer, the logistics head, the enforcer with a son in university. The vote tonight is not for a new boss. It is for an exit strategy. I am spinning off the legitimate assets into a new corporate structure. Any man here may convert his standing in the old organization into a shareholding at a generous valuation. You can become a silent partner in a real business. Or you can stay here with my uncle and Kang and fight over the corpse of the past while the world moves on. It was the ultimate power move, not seizing control but offering liberation. For many, it was an offer they never dreamed they'd receive. The vote was not called. It happened in the shifting of eyes, in the slow closing of the financial folders, in the men who would not meet Kang's furious gaze. The old god's temple was emptying, not through violence, but through a better offer. Kang saw it, he drew a gun. You ruin everything with your pretty words. He didn't point it at June, he pointed it at Aris. You started this, you softened him, I will fix what you broke. Time seemed to stop. June moved, but he was too far away. Aris stood her ground, facing the barrel, her heart a thunderclap in her chest. But before Kang's finger could tighten on the trigger, a meaty hand closed over his wrist. It was the enforcer, the one with the son in university. He wrenched the gun upward. Enough, the man grunted. We are not animals in front of guests. It was over. The last thread of the old world's code, however twisted, had snapped. You did not shoot unarmed women in a council meeting. Even Kang had broken too many rules. June was at Aris's side in an instant, but she was already stepping forward, not away. She looked at Kang, disarmed and seething, then at June's uncle, who seemed to have aged a decade in minutes. The building you burned is gone, she said. The new one will have your name on a plaque in the lobby. The Kang Seok Jung Memorial Community Wing. So everyone who finds hope there will know the name of the man who tried to stop it and failed. The poetic cruelty of it was masterful. It transformed his act of destruction into a permanent monument to his defeat. Kang looked like he'd been gutted. June sent the text, not to Inspector Park for a raid, but to his driver. The meeting is adjourned. The conversion offers will be delivered by end of week. For those who choose a different path, he looked at his uncle and Kang, I suggest you be on it by morning. He took Aris's hand and they walked out of the warehouse the same way they came in. No shots fired, no blood spilled, only the quiet, tectonic shifting of power from one era to the next. The aftermath was a quiet tsunami. June's uncle retired to his country estate, a broken king without a kingdom. Kang, stripped of financial backing and facing renewed police attention from June's Gulf friend, fled to Vietnam. The organization didn't so much dissolve as undergo a corporate merger, with a significant portion of its assets laundered through legitimate channels into Han River Holdings. 3 weeks later, Ara stood in a sun-drenched empty lot where the community center had been. Construction would start next month. Mrs. Cho, recovered, stood beside her, the plans for the new adaptive arts wing unfurled between them. "He funded the entire thing," Mrs. Cho said, shaking her head in wonder. "Anonymously, though I think the Kang Memorial Wing was your touch." Eris smiled. It felt right. That evening she returned not to the sterile penthouse, but to a modern, airy hillside home June had purchased. It had a studio with north light for her, and an office with a view of the city for him. He was waiting in the living room, out of his suit, looking more at ease than she'd ever seen him. "The last conversion was signed today," he said. "The books are closed, it's done." She sat beside him. "And who are you now, June the businessman?" He considered this. "I am a man who is learning that building something is harder and better than dominating everything." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing over her healed wrist. "And you?" "Aris, the program director." "I'm an artist," she said simply, "with a different canvas." The final surprise came a month later. June was called to a meeting at the headquarters of a major Seoul conglomerate. They were interested in a strategic partnership with his logistics company. In the boardroom, after the dry negotiations, the elderly chairman asked him a personal question. "I knew your father, a good man, honest. I heard a strange story that you put a rival's name on a charity building. Why?" June, choosing his words carefully, said, "To remind myself that the worst actions can be forced to serve a better purpose." The chairman nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud, not of the empire but of the answer." As June left, the chairman's assistant handed him an envelope. Inside was a child's drawing, a bright, chaotic, wonderful picture of a house, a tree, and two stick figures holding hands. On the back, in a child's handwriting, "For the man who helped my teacher." It was from Mina. Mrs. Cho had sent it. June framed it that night and hung it in his new office, right beside his first legitimate business license. The two artifacts sat side by side, the proof of his future and the reason for it. The story that began with a public denial and a rain-soaked kneel ended not with a dramatic reconciliation, but with a quiet, daily choice. The choice to build instead of break, to trust instead of control, to adapt together. June never again said the word nothing to describe Aris. He didn't need to. His every action, the surrendered territories, the new community center, the life they built in the hillside house, shouted what she was: the catalyst, the compass, the partner. And Aris, who had once been defined by what was taken from her, found herself defined by what she helped create. The hook was resolved. The denial, meant to protect, had nearly destroyed them. But in the crucible of that failure, they forged something stronger than protection: a partnership. The kneeling in the rain wasn't the end of his desperation. It was the beginning of their evolution. As the city lights glittered below their new home, the final page of this chapter turned. But every ending in a story about adaptation is just the setup for the next beginning. And theirs was just getting started. So what is the true anatomy of a protective lie? We dissected one today, a lie that was meant to be a shield but functioned first as a weapon and ultimately as a catalyst. June and Aris's story is a blueprint written in the universal language of human frailty. It shows us that the most dangerous prison is often the one we build for those we love, convinced the bars will keep them safe. His denial was a solitary decision, a relic of the old world where power meant acting alone. But their salvation was a collaborative act, a testament to the new world they dared to imagine, where power is shared, and strength is measured not by what you can control, but by what you can build alongside someone else. The noble idiot trope thrives because it taps into a deep, flawed fantasy that love is best expressed through solitary sacrifice. That by bearing the burden alone, by becoming the villain in your partner's story, you prove the depth of your feeling. But this story argues a different, more radical thesis, that true protection isn't about hiding the truth, but about facing the danger together. It's not about making someone invisible, but about making them undeniable. Aris, the artist who learned to adapt, became the architect of their redemption not by fighting June's war, but by changing its very definition. She transformed their greatest vulnerability, their care for each other, into their most powerful strategic asset. In doing so, she embodied the core principle of every great romance and every great comeback, that our broken pieces don't have to be hidden. They can become the unique, compelling design of something stronger. The rain-soaked Neil was not the end of his desperation. It was the birth of their new language. A language where apology is followed by action, where regret is redeemed by change, and where love is not a weakness to be concealed, but a foundation to be built upon. Their journey from a gilded cage to a hillside home, from public denial to private partnership, leaves us with a lingering question that applies far beyond the screen. In our own lives, when we are tempted to lie, to hide, to control in the name of protection, are we building a fortress, or are we laying the groundwork for a sanctuary? If this exploration of shattered dreams and unexpected redemption resonated with you, if you believe in stories where love doesn't just conquer all but transforms all, then your voice is part of this conversation. Hit that subscribe button to join a community that craves depth in drama and meaning in the meltdown. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven the lie? And what's a trope you'd love us to dismantle next? Because the most compelling stories aren't just about what happens to us, but about what we choose to become in response. Thanks for watching.